Hello there, welcome to my channel. My name is Doug and I'm back with another fountain pen review. And thank you to those of you who have supported my channel by liking and subscribing. Your support allows me to continue to bring you fountain pen reviews as I am unsponsored on this channel, so thanks. Today's fountain pen is courtesy of the generous gift of Mr. Tom Schultz of California, who was one of the lucky winners of a free fountain pen giveaway I had on the channel a while back. He responded with this lovely Pilot Elite fountain pen as a gift. He was interested in seeing a comparison with my Pilot e95s. Thanks, Tom. I'm interested in that comparison as well. And this is what we're going to do today. We're going to compare this Pilot e95s with a 14 karat gold nib to this new old stock Pilot Elite with a steel nib in what I'm going to call the tale of two pilots. Or, in other words, it was the best of times, it was the worst of times. So let's find out what the dickens Doug is talking about right now. And what I'd like to do today is go over the parts and features of these pens, show some size comparisons, some measurements, and then provide some writing samples. After the writing samples, please stay tuned as I will talk about what I like and what I don't like so much about these fountain pens. I'm so pleased that Tom gifted me this Pilot Elite. It gives me an opportunity to showcase one of my most favorite fountain pens of my collection, the Pilot e95s. I'll link the review of this pen in the description, but my wife bought me this Pilot for Christmas 2019. And it hasn't been without ink since. I was fascinated by this pen because of how it goes from being a pocket pen to a full-length pen so quickly when posted. I was also fascinated by the inlaid gold nib and by the fact that even though I prefer pens that have a greater girth and thicker sections, this slim tapering section pen is incredibly comfortable in my hand. And then there is the fact that once you look into this model of Pilot, you'll find yourself down a whole new rabbit hole.
Oh, my paws and whiskers! I'll be late.
Excuse me, sir. Have you seen a rather large white rabbit with a yellow waistcoat and white gloves hereabout? Thank you very much.
Solo!
Of pen collectability. Pilot has made pocket pens in this style for decades, and some people have huge collections of them in all kinds of varieties. So today we're going to contrast and compare the Pilot e95s and the Pilot Elite. The design of this pen predates the official release of the Pilot Elite S in 1968. And there have been variations in nib design, colors, materials, cap designs over the last 52 years. But both of these pens strongly resemble the 1968 Elite S. This 14 karat gold nibbed version was made in Japan for the US market and is named the e95s for copyright issues, where the identical pen for the Japanese market is called the Elite 95. The 95 in both names commemorates the 95th anniversary of Pilot as a company founded by Ryosuke Namiki in 1915. So these new model E95Ss and Elite 95s were released by Pilot in 2013. Here's a commercial advertising the original Pilot Elite S from 1968 and starring the Hapa Fumi guy himself, Kyosen Ohashi. Here's another more recent Pilot pen commercial starring Rob Corddry, which provides another reason to love Pilot, their great sense of humor.
Wow. Some instrument you got there.
Like it?
Yeah. So
Impressive?
yeah. Must give you great joy.
You want to hold it? Could I? That's why they call it Dr. Grip.
Dr. Grip Gel from Pilot. Smooth writing, gel ink, and a big cushion barrel.
Ooh-ah!
Dr. Grip from Pilot. Think in ink.
Further research informs me that this steel-nibbed Elite that Tom got fairly inexpensively on eBay, is in fact a Korean-made Elite. Apparently Pilot licenses their Pilot name and the model name Elite to a Korean pen manufacturer to produce in their name. The nib is different in size, shape, and markings, and the gold lettering and bands are obviously painted on rather than actually gold, as on the Japanese Elites. If you'll forgive me for mentioning analogies from the acoustic guitar world, this isn't unlike Martin or Taylor guitar companies having factories in Mexico producing basic and less expensive guitar models with their brand names attached. The sourcing is sketchy, but I believe there must be a pen-making plant in Korea run by Pilot Japan. This would be similar, I think, to the Parker China plant. As I was writing this, it was becoming confusing even to me which Elite is which.
That's Garth. Stun him. Hold his pocket. That's Garth. Fascinating.
So let's be clear about what we're talking about before we look at these two pens. The most recently made Japan Elite was released in 2013 and is called the Pilot Elite in Japan and the e95s in the West. This is my 2018 e95s, and it comes in two colors, this burgundy and champagne gold version and a black and gold version. They sell for around $130 US and have a 14 karat gold nib. So if it says Elite, whether black or burgundy, says Japan on the back of the cap, and has a larger nib with 14 karat gold and size markings, it is the Japanese-made pen. If it is black and gold with a smaller steel nib that only says Pilot on it, it is made in Korea and not the same as the Japanese-made pen for either the Japanese market or the Western market. From here on, I will call this the Korean Elite. All of this doesn't make the Korean Elite here a bad pen, but let's get into the details and look at the similarities and differences. For a full review of the e95s, see the link to my previous review in the description. When put side by side, it is clear these are two very different pens, even though they are based on the same model. The Korean Elite is thinner and slightly longer than the Japanese. From the top, we see they both have a flat but slightly domed finial, with the Korean Elite being substantially smaller in diameter. The clips look similar from the front, but you can see the difference from the side. The Korean Elite is chunkier, but they both function with the same nice pivot action. See, it pivots into that cap and is very, very functional on both pens. The Korean Elite also has a thinner clip band. The Korean Elite's cap is about 2 millimeters longer and about 1.5 millimeters thinner than the e95s. The Korean Elite is entirely made of injection mold plastic, where the e95s has an anodized aluminum cap with a shiny, smooth, clear lacquer coating, with the rest of the pen being injection molded plastic. The barrel of the Korean Elite is also about 3 millimeters longer than the barrel of the e95s and thinner as well. Now let's focus on the cap bands. They are different. Please note that the Pilot Elite made for the Japanese market will have the word Elite right here rather than this E that's on the Western version. Now the Korean version has Elite on here as well, but it is very different in that it does not say Pilot Japan on the back like the Japanese version would. And the gold is silk screened paint rather than gold, and the band doesn't extend to the bottom of the cap. If you see a gap between the gold band and the end of the cap, it's Korean, and of course no Pilot Japan. If you look closely, you can see how ragged that word Elite is on the edges of the letters. The cap pulls off, and this is one of the most wonderful features of the Japanese Pilot for me. This slip cap comes off and posts and goes back on again with such silky elegance that it is a distinct pleasure each time you write with the pen. It is like you feel that quality every time, and it gives you that satisfied feeling of luxury. This is the silkiest, smoothest slip cap I have ever experienced on any pen.
Pull your glass, I'll get rid of it somehow. Pull your glass and drink it right down.
The Korean is similar, but different. It's stickier, even though it works. It's hard to describe. You have to feel the difference. It takes a little bit of effort and seems to stick on there when you push it down. And you have to sort of pull it off and push it back. Whereas this is just like silk. Especially when you post it. It seems to have some friction right there and then releases that friction right there. I don't know what they do with that clutch in there, but it is magic. Before we get on to the section and the nib, these pens were designed to post. Like Kaweco Sports, the cap is almost as long as the entire pen. You can see how long that cap is, almost as long as the entire pen. Now that the caps are off, we see a long, tapering, slender section, and the biggest difference between the two pens, the nibs. The e95 is a large 14 karat gold inlaid nib, and the Korean Elite is a gold-colored semi-hooded steel nib that more closely resembles a Parker 45 nib than the Japanese Elite. Here is a Parker 45 from the 1970s up against the Elite, and you can see what I'm talking about, that they look very, very similar. In fact, these two nibs are so similar, I now understand where Moonman got the idea to make a pocket pen version of their Parker 45 clone, the Moonman 80. This is the Moonman 80S, and this pen is much shorter, even posted, than either the Korean Elite or the e95s. And it's not a slip cap, it is a snap cap. And here are the three pens together. And because the Moonman M80S is so short, it can't take any cartridges but a Parker short and the ridiculous little squeeze converter that came with the pen. Let's look closer at the nibs. The E95 says 14K 585, which is the gold content, Pilot, M in brackets for medium, Japan, and 1218, which is the manufacturing date of December 2018. And the Korean Elite says Pilot, P-I-L-O-T, almost buried there under that hood. And there are the plastic feeds. And another difference between the two, the Korean Elite has a round ink port, and the E95S has a rectangular ink port. The sections unscrew to reveal a Pilot ink cartridge that I refill with a syringe on the E95S, and exactly the same thing on the Korean Elite. Both pens will accept the Con 20 converter, which came with the E95S, and a Pilot Con 40 converter, which fits both pens. The problem with both of those converters is you can't check your ink levels in either of them. Plus, the Con 40 only has a capacity of 0.5 milliliter of ink, whereas these Pilot cartridges hold close to a full milliliter of ink each. Both pens have cap liners. The E95S has a black plastic cap liner down there, and there's a white plastic one in the Korean Elite. The white plastic one on the Elite is much smaller than the one in the E95S. The E95S, as I said, retails for around $130 US, and the Korean Elite new old stock is available on Etsy and eBay for around $20 US. Now let's look at some size comparisons. And here we are with the Pilot E95S and the Korean Pilot Elite with a Moonman 80S, a Kaweco Sport, and a Pilot Metropolitan for scale. Let's look at them posted. And here they are posted, and you can see how both the E95s and the Korean Elite become normal-sized fountain pens when posted. The Kaweco is close, but it's still a pocket pen when posted. And now let's look at some measurements, and I'll be back with a writing sample. And we're back with the writing portion of the review. This is Clairefontaine 90 GSM paper, and this is the Korean Pilot Elite. And it has a fine steel nib. Let's check the wetness. This nib is very, very wet. When I first inked this pen, it wrote very fine and was pretty scratchy when I drew a line to the upper right. This told me that the tines were most likely out of alignment. So I checked with my loupe and immediately noticed a very slight alignment problem. This photo shows how the pen wrote when first inked. Then I worked on the alignment and smoothed the nib with a few strokes on some 8000 grit micromesh and then some figure eights on some 12,000 grit for a minute or so. Now it writes beautifully. And the ink today is Iroshizuku Konpeki. Here's the swatch for the Iroshizuku Konpeki, along with some Diamine Asa Blue and some Robert Oster Soda Pop Blue. And as to line variation, well, there's not going to be much. It's very stiff. It is steel, and that nib is semi-hooded, so that's going to restrict that nib from flexing at all anyway, or even having any bounce. Here is a Parker 45 with essentially the same kind of nib, but this is a 14 karat gold nib, and it has a little bit of flexibility in it, but not much. That semi-hooded style reduces the ability of the nib to flex. And comparing this line to my Richard Binder chart, it comes out at a 0.4 millimeter line, which is a Western extra fine and a Japanese fine, which makes sense. And let's look at the E95 for a moment. This is the Pilot E95s, and it is a medium 14 karat gold nib. That was a bit thin to start because it was sitting out so long. I'm sure it got dry. And the ink again is Iroshizuku Konpeki in this pen. This pen is glassy smooth. It has got, I wouldn't say it flexes or has any line variation to speak of, but it is super smooth. And super wet. And I just love this pen.
You've got my pen. Oh, sorry. Here, you'll be all right. It's all over. There we go. There we go.
And for our quote, And for some reverse writing, very, very scratchy, very dry. And some quick writing. That feed has no problem keeping up, and it's very wet pen. So, what do I like and what do I not like about these fountain pens? Well, let me gush about my Pilot E95 first. I've used this fountain pen at least once a week for the last year and 2 months. It is easily one of my top 3 fountain pens. Not that anyone's ever asked what my top 3 fountain pens might be, however, but it would certainly be in the top 3. The pen is so light and so comfortable in the hand, and the way it caps and posts and recaps is so elegant. And the look and feel of this silky smooth lacquered anodized aluminum and champagne colored gold cap against this beautiful burgundy body and section is nothing short of luxurious. It was my first purchased gold fountain pen, and it was a Christmas gift from my wife. The Korean Elite is a very close copy. The feel of the pen isn't exactly the same. The cap doesn't come off or post as well. It's a bit of a sticky operation. And in the hand, it's perceptibly thinner. My E95 is just on the boundary of being too thin, so this one is too thin, for me anyway. The nib on the Korean Elite isn't as smooth, but of course the nib is a fine and not a medium, but it still doesn't feel like the same quality as the Japanese Pilot nib, even for steel. The dislikes I have are the same ones as for my E95s. The fact that the Con 20 or Con 40 converters don't allow you to see the ink levels when inside the pen. You have to remove the Con 40 to see it. And both converters hold substantially less ink than a cartridge. Of course, I've solved that issue by syringe filling the Pilot cartridge. And I get a milliliter of ink, and I can see the ink levels without removing it. For $20, you can get an amazing pocket pen that writes fairly well. So that's a bargain in my book. I would still argue that the Japanese E95 or Elite 95 with the 14 karat gold nibs are worth the extra cost for a fountain pen that you'll write with forever. So try out the $20 pen, and if you like the way it functions, you might be compelled to start searching for a deal on an E95 or an Elite. Thanks again to Tom Schultz for your generosity in donating this pen to me for review. My wife thanks you as well, because she absolutely adores this little Pilot Elite, and as soon as I weigh and measure it, it will be going on her desk. And there you have it. If you like this video, please like and subscribe, and don't forget to ring that bell to get instant notifications whenever a new video is posted. And that just leaves it for me to say thank you for watching. And that's all she wrote.
I made this.